All right, so it looks like we got some pretty crazy news here. So this article says Harris in quote striking distance of Trump in Florida, pollster says. So it looks like there's some kind of like polls tightening in Florida according to this one poll, and it looks like Democrats are getting really happy. They're thinking that maybe Florida or Texas are actually in play. So let's see what this article says. This article says Vice President Harris is nipping at former President Trump's heels in his home state of Florida. A pollster from Suffolk University says after a new Sunshine State survey. The USA Today Suffolk University WSVN-TV poll found Harris just 5 points behind Trump among likely Florida voters, 42% to 47%, just outside the poll's margin of error. It appears that the margin of error of the poll is about like 4.5 points, which is quite a bit. So keep that in mind as well. It says Florida has 1 million more registered Republicans than Democrats, and Trump won the state in both 2016 and 2020. Quote, given those circumstances, I was surprised that Harris is within striking distance, being only 5 points down. David Paleologos, I don't know how to say his name, director of the Suffolk University Political Research Center, told USA Today in a Tuesday report. Among Florida independents, the vice president leads the former president with 41% support to 34%. This is pretty massive here. This is a pretty massive one, saying with independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. taking 10%. This poll seems to indicate that overwhelming Republican Party registration advantage is partially offset by Kamala Harris winning independents, especially independent women, Paleologos said in a press release accompanying the survey. Quote, Florida could become more of a battleground state than anyone would have expected, especially given that there will be an abortion rights question Amendment 4 on the statewide ballot, which could drive up turnout among women. The weird part about Florida is like the Florida ballots are like the stupidest thing possible. It'll be like, do you support Medicare for all? 70% yes. Do you support raising the minimum wage? 70% yes. Do you support ending all racism? 99% yes. Do you support Hitler? 100% yes. And it's like, what the fuck? It makes no sense. So it'd be like the ballot will just be a bunch of progressive policies, vast majority supporting, and then it'd be like super random. So even if the abortion rights question is on there, I'm sure it's going to lead to some boost, but there might be some kind of weird boost going on. And we kind of saw this in the 2020 primary too, where it was like more than half of the people would be like, yeah, we support Medicare for all. And then it'd be like the person who doesn't support Medicare for all would just destroy. We kind of saw that a lot. There's also seems to be some reporting on kind of like the voter registration numbers that are interesting. It'll be interesting to see if RFK is hurting Trump in this situation. You know, I think the third-party presence in 2020 was a lot more muted than it typically is. So will RFK take more from Trump than he will Kamala? Another big thing also is, you know, Florida is kind of a bit of a crackhead lunatic state, so I'm sure there's some weirdo anti-vaxxers that maybe he can tap into who'd vote for Trump but instead would vote for Kamala. That could be a potential help. And then her doing well with independent voters. It doesn't say how this would fare if RFK is not in here. But it says Harris has surged in surveys since entering the race last month after President Biden withdrew. She's taken the lead by 1.4 in the Hill Decision Desk HQ numbers. A lot of the poll numbers seem kind of bad in terms of like, when you look at a lot of the numbers, like the Siena New York Times numbers suck major wieners because the Siena college polls were really horribly off. They were like a lot of the polls that were really horribly off for the Rust Belt back in 2020, and so you can't really take them seriously. And then some of the other ones are just a complete joke where it's like, I saw one where it was like, somehow I think it was like Wisconsin had a double the margin, was up like +9 Kamala, and then Michigan was +5. They just didn't make sense. There's also this article here. It says, as Florida GOP cheers voters lead, Dems warn they've got momentum. Quote, I wouldn't be too cocky if I were Republicans, said Max Stepanovich, a former GOP strategist. So there's some kind of like, I guess, big thing that they're hit with. There's this voter roll or like voter registration numbers that they hit where they have 1 million more registered voters. But it looks like that guy is actually saying to be careful, basically, kind of be careful. So it says, what I would do is I would suggest that we have a little bit of historical perspective, said Stepanovich. He pointed to gubernatorial races for Republicans Jeb Bush, Charlie Crist, and Rick Scott. Those are races Dems had an edge of around 300K to 600K more voters but failed to win the office. A lead, he said, means little without a ground game, solid candidate and the right policy platform for them. Quote, I wouldn't be too cocky if I were them. I mean, they have reason to feel confident, but I wouldn't get all above my raisin about it. So it looks like some experts are kind of warning, like, yo, be careful. Like, this is kind of coming a little bit close in terms of, like, hey, this is not exactly a guarantee, right? It's not exactly a guarantee for you. So we can see this kind of Suffolk poll here. So it's a B+ rated pollster, which is pretty solid. Those are not bad. It's not a bad rating. So it's not like a joke pollster. It's pretty serious. Kennedy is getting 5%, which it looks like it's eating into Trump's numbers. So this is kind of a boost. And what's really fascinating is that there's a lot of like crazy sentiment, I think, that needs to kind of chill out and relax from Democrats. 'Cause I think get into dangerous territory on a couple of grounds. So you can see like this tweet says, imagine he loses Florida. It's like crying face emoji and then like a dead emoji. Wake up, Florida Dems. This is winnable. Harris is gaining ground in Florida. This is someone who's saying no. This is a really interesting one. So this guy, Michael Crush, he says GOP will be forced to pull money from other states to defend Florida. So this would be an interesting strategy. The Kamala campaign already seems to be pretty dedicated to this strategy. I got a lot of backlash for sending out a tweet that they were dumping a bunch of money into Florida first. Was like their first primary goal. And I was kind of like, you should spend that money first in Georgia or one of those other states. That's what I was thinking. But a lot of people are like, no, you need to focus on the down ballot races, which I guess is important. But you know, the Republicans are always pretty broke in presidential elections, so this could be an interesting strategy where you kind of try to hit them so that they get defensive. The concern would be like a 2016 or even 2020 situation where you get too cocky and confident about winning and then you don't end up winning. I think the Democrats are getting way too excited right now where it's like, yo, it's highly, highly unlikely you're going to pull Florida or Texas. But you can see so many of these awful for Trump. You know, DeSantis won that state by 19 points in 2022. Again, this is kind of like a support thing for Kamala, right? You know, this is one that's kind of against, but wow, I thought Trump would be ahead by way more than that. Is Texas at play yet? Only up +5 in Florida. Panic. You know, there's someone saying this, so sound the collision alarm. You know, there's a lot of momentum. Just so you know that I'm not faking it. You know, Florida going blue, buckle up. Like I've been saying, Florida's in play. Florida in play. Blue heart, blue heart, blue heart. Trump is losing grip on Florida. There's just a ton of these. So there's a legit momentum towards, Florida's going blue. I think it's highly, highly unlikely that Florida goes blue. I think people need to chill out and relax. If we kind of go back and compare, I like to go back and compare to the 2020 numbers because unfortunately the 2020 state polls are really horribly off. So we can kind of do a little bit of a comparison here. So you can see in 2020, Biden was up by 2.5 points in the aggregate, and he ended up losing by about 3 points. So it's off by 5 points. State level polling is highly unreliable, it looks like, in swing states. Georgia seemed to be kind of the closest. I think AZ maybe as well. The Rust Belt was really horrible as well. So even polling numbers we have to be careful of. And I think that a big way to predict the election is kind of deciding ceilings and floors for candidates. I think a floor for Trump is 46%. So he was already at 46 and he outperformed heavily. He way outperformed. I think he got more than 50%. So you can see this. But when I did go through and I did actually look to find, it was hard for me to find the most recent, I should say, Suffolk poll from the 2020 election. You see this one here, and it actually has Biden even with Trump, which is actually a good sign for the accuracy of this poll. And I think it's supposed to be like kind of a likely voter poll. This one's saying registered voter, but the article said a likely voter, so not sure what's up with the discrepancy there, who's wrong there. But we can see that Suffolk had them even here, and you can see around them is kind of like if you did like an AOE spell and hit all the sort of polls around you, right? You have all these polls are like +5, +4, +11, +5, +4, a bunch of these. This one has Harris and Pence, so we're not even counting that. +6, these are all like laughably comically wrong, and then there's just like this random even Suffolk poll. And it's not like that far out from the election. It's 1 month before. It's not like August. So you might be able to put some stock into these numbers maybe because it had the outcome is even, and Trump ended up winning by about 3, so they were off by like 3 points. These ones were off by like 9 points or whatever, which is like laughably ridiculous. So I guess they have some. I really want to do comparisons. When I look at pollsters, I'm going to try to compare them to how accurate they were in 2020 because that's kind of the most recent numbers that we have to look at. So I want to see that, and so Suffolk actually has some kind of good numbers behind it. But I don't think that Florida is going to end up going blue, and I think that a lot of the polls are kind of looking not as hot as people are pointing them out. I think there's a lack of sort of rigor in terms of analyzing the poll numbers to see what they're kind of really saying. But I think that there's an interesting idea, like this guy says, like, hey, if we kind of are gaining in Florida, well, then the GOP is going to have to take money out, and they won't be able to have money elsewhere. That's a pretty interesting but risky strategy. And so I think you definitely put some resources into Florida for sure, especially if you think like long run strategy. And then maybe if Kamala is able to do a lot better with Hispanic voters than Biden did, plus RFK really hurting him, maybe that would end up being the outcome potentially. But I think it's pretty heavily risky though, I'd say probably. But it'll be pretty interesting to see what happens. I don't think Florida's going blue, but I don't know. Maybe there's some movement in the direction, and we'll see if Kennedy stays in the race or not. But let me know your thoughts. Florida, is it going blue? Is it possible for it to go blue? What do you guys think happens? Definitely let me know down below in the comment section.